Were you afraid of the boogeyman as a child? The nightmarish entity that its life goal is to scare the bejesus out of bad children? But you may have not heard about this one. It may sound crazy, but after my experience, I may never look at myself as a normal person. My family and friends never believed in me, though. Call me confused, a liar, etc. Maybe. I was only 10 at the time. I live in a neighborhood that you may have seen in the old 50s movies such as Grease with my younger sister Emily and my dad. Our mom was at work until 10. I was watching Sesame Street with Emily until we saw a bumper of a new show, Between the Lions. Between the Lions is basically a show similar to Sesame Street, but it was about how to read and spell. Once we watched an episode about a book titled El Labrador, but what I saw seemed bizarre. The characters who played the lions were acting normal, but everything around the lion family was just indescribable. Humanoid lizards crawling out of walls, pale bald people, spider walking down the stairs and across the halls. Men in dark hooded robes just stood there with the children, as if they were their teachers. Emily asked me about the hooded man and the creatures. I told her that it was probably just a Halloween episode. However, after checking the calendar, I saw that it wasn't October yet. I thought this must have been a rerun. Suddenly, I was walked into the living room, and I heard Emily call my name. Kyle, what does those words mean? I looked at the cubs' parents, Theo and Cleo, saying and spelling out words such as fire, blood, murder, destruction, and evil. However, they simply explained what the actual words are. I was unnerved by this, so I went to go change the channel, much to Emily's dismay, but I noticed something which caught my attention. The set was similar to our library that was right across my home. I thought that the library was usually CGI and not real. However, it appeared as if the episode was actually filmed in my hometown library. That's not even the scary part, because I looked from my window where the children were playing in my neighbor's front yard. Soon I glanced back at my television, and in absolute shock, the children were being filmed. Also, the children were playing with both Lionel and Leona. It was as if they were filming us live. My eyes widened, and Emily noticed that I was pale as a sheet. She asked me what was wrong. I already started to breathe heavily, feeling my chest going up and down. I told her to go in her room and watch SpongeBob. She nodded and went to her bedroom. What was going on? Why were the children in the library? And how is it that I'm not losing my mind over something? A pair of little children couldn't understand? Being only 10 years old? Barely mature enough to understand these types of predicaments. I was both confused and terrified. But I had to keep it from becoming more of an issue, even if it brings me to my downfall. The next day after I got off the school bus, Emily hugged me and said the lions were following her to her school. My mind went in all directions. Who followed you? I asked, not letting her know that I was horrified. The lions from the show, silly, she chirped. Now I was starting to panic. My heart was racing like a galloping horse. I started sweating bullets, and I was at the verge of breaking down into panic screams, 'cause now she was telling me what sounded like something that a madman would say in an insane asylum. But I thank heavens this was going inside of me, because I didn't want to frighten her and let her know this was a disturbing situation. Emily and I went inside, and she already started watching Between the Lions. Soon I witnessed something that made my blood run cold. It showed all 4 puppets inside my own house. Also, I was in frame. I looked at the TV and then back at the cameraman would have been. I ran out of the house screaming for my mom and dad as they pulled into the driveway, tears in my eyes. I was literally going insane. However, I knew that I had to be strong for my family. But most of all, I had to be strong for Emily. But who was going to be strong for me? I had no choice but to ward off this entity that's stalking Emily at school and scaring me to death. Later that night, I crept out of my house and ran into the library with nothing but a flashlight. I had remembered the people who owned the library, locking the doors and windows. I might have regretted doing this, but I had no other option. I picked the lock and entered the front of the door. Good thing Skyrim has taught me how to pick locks. I searched through the entire library and found a mysterious book upstairs in the middle of the children's section. It was a book of the Necronomicon, a book on how to raise the dead. I know this because I accidentally took a peek at my dad watching Evil Dead. I knew that if I took this book to my parents and showed them what our library was doing, they would believe me. So I grabbed the book and looked at it with my 10-year-old hands. Suddenly I heard the office doorknob shaking, so I turned and called out, "Who's there?" Every fiber of my being froze in unimaginable fear. The door slowly creaked open, and I heard the most horrible sound I've ever heard. Then I heard them crawling on all fours. Pulsating, bloodshot eyes were looking straight at me. One of them had bandages around its eye, obviously blind, their grotesque and sharp teeth snarling and pointed ears down, obviously angry at what I've done. But what on earth did I do? All I did was grab this fictional book on how to raise the dead. I shined the flashlight to the creatures, but they vanished. I turned it off to see them still there. I flashed it on and off, realizing that they were invisible when in light. I went to run downstairs, but I saw two familiar creatures blocking the entrance. My only escape. The monster on the other side of that had a hat and t-shirt similar to Leon in the show. I just figured it out. The truth behind the Between the Lions. It was them. These things I was confronting. This was them. The lions from the show. In the show, the lions were puppets, but in real life, it was a little game of the Russian roulette, but with reality. They were brainwashing us, tricking us into becoming their victims before killing or eating us, the meats that the puppets were eating. Those were parts of children. I did not want to think that. I did not want to think of something like that. I just couldn't. My childish mind was so feeble to much nonsense. I wanted out of this hellish library as fast as I could, but I was stuck in place, too scared to move. Then I felt the blind creature grab onto my shoulder from behind, biting into my shoulder. I let out a gut-wrenching cry as the pain shot right through my right shoulder, down my arm. The thing that was supposed to be Lionel let out a demented, clown-like cackle. As I cried out in both pain and terror, I elbowed the monster off my back and punched it in the jaw. I ran downstairs, past the two monsters, slammed the door shut and ran home. I was beginning to feel dizzy from the amount of blood loss, so I tried crying out for Mom and Dad. I thought I wasn't going to make it. Eventually I collapsed, and in the middle of the front lawn and blacked out. I woke up in the hospital and heard Emily chirping, "Look, Mommy, he's waking up." "Emily?" I asked quietly. "Kyle, thank God!" my mom said with tears in her eyes. "I'm glad you're okay. Thank you, doctor." My dad smiled, shaking hands with the medical professional. He was happy that I was going to make it out alive. "Where did you find this weird book?" my dad asked. I looked and saw it was a Necronomicon book in my dad's hands. I was in the library last night." With that said, I told them everything, but they wouldn't believe me. They said that the librarian told them that I was breaking into the library and stealing a book. Also, I was attacked by a guard dog that was just doing its job. However, I knew these creatures were no guard dogs. Some things I saw were standing on their hind legs, doing their movements as I recall the marionette-like, and they didn't run up towards me. Instead, they were flown towards me, as if hands were inside their backs and made their facial movements. This reminded me of the new It movie, like how the horror movie reviewers describe Pennywise like puppet-like in Bill Skarsgård's performance. Because of my traumatizing experience, I might as well be in the new It movie. Those creatures I saw in the library that night were just like new and improved Pennywise, maybe worse than Pennywise. I didn't know what happened, or how nobody saw what I saw. I grew up paranoid and skeptical of the library, so I moved out of that town and ended up living in my suburban home in Newport News, Virginia. I still watch Between the Lions on YouTube, but after what happened during my childhood, it made me think twice about things. Let this story be a warning to you all out there reading this. Be extra careful about what you watch on PBS Kids. They may be harmless and cute to kids. However, dark secrets sometimes lurk behind their innocent disguises. Maybe the last thing you'll ever think about is the IBO.